Hello and welcome to another episode of Microsoft Fabric. And in today's video, we are going to discuss SCD, slowly changing dimension. Some of you has asked on the channel, how can we create a SCD on Microsoft Fabric? So first of all, we'll understand what is SCD and we'll understand creation of this SCD. How will it change our overall transformation process? Because once you create SCD, you need to populate the keys back into your fact table, or when you create your fact table, you need to populate the key. The code will change a little bit. So let me take you through the definition first. So basically SCD means slowly changing dimension. Slowly changing dimension is a concept and technique commonly used in data warehousing and database management system to handle changes to the dimension data over a period of time while preserving the historical information. So basically you have to preserve the historical information. Very common is like if you are an employee in your organization, what happens after some time, your department may change, your manager may change. So if I look at the past data, let's say your manager changed in January. Now, if I look at data before January, should I look at your current manager, or should I be getting the data that your manager was someone different? In the December, there was a different manager. Say person A was your manager and now person B was manager. So if I look at December data, it should show that person A was your manager. Now, if I look at current data, it should show person B was your manager. Now, so this information has to be maintained. And that's where the slowly changing dimension can maintain these kind of information. Now, there are various ways. We have SCD type 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but SCD type 2 is something which is very common and we are going to use here. So the goal of the SCD is to keep track of the changes in the dimension attributes in a structured manner, allowing historical analysis and reporting. And that's what I say, historical analysis and reporting is something which you care about. Now, SCD type 2 is also known as add-on row type. It is the most common type of slowly changing dimension. It's the most common. In SCD type 2 dimension, a new record is created whenever there is a change to the dimension. So the moment there is a change, it sees that there is a change in the dimension, it creates a new row. The new row contains the new attribute values and old rows is updated with the end date. So we will have so in our dimension, we might not have, or at the source table, master table, we might not have a start date and end date. But in the dimension, we will be creating a start date and end date to make sure that, there is a start to the record and there is an end to the record. And sometimes this might be available at your source. Then it makes your work easy. But here we are going to take an example where the source doesn't have the start date and end date. We are going to create an end date. So we are going to end it as soon as it getting changed, because we are creating SCD in Fabric from a table which is not a SCD. It's not a slowly changing dimension or slowly changing master table. This allows you to track the history of the changes dimension attribute while still maintaining the current row for each dimension member. And let me take you through the example. Now, if you look at example here, if you see item ID is repeating twice, but one of the record is ending and another record is starting. Now here, because I was doing some experiment, I did not taken care of time, but ideally this time should be only a difference within milliseconds or something like that. Not here it has some difference of 15-16 seconds, which should not happen. Ideally we should use the same timestamp. I was using a get date, so it got updated, inserted and updated different period of time, but we should ensure we take a variable and do it. Now, so here we have a slowly changing dimension. You can see item 1 and item 2 both are having a start date and end date where they are changing, but others records are not changing over a period of time, so they are still not having any end date. Now this is something we want to achieve in a Fabric from a table which is actually only this much. So it doesn't have a valid start date and valid end date. So what I've done is I created a script which will be able to handle it. Now in my script, because my sales table doesn't have a data for the current date, my valid end date, anytime I want to update the data and I'm going to bring in the new data, I'm going to force the valid end date is 2019-0101. So I'm going to hard code that. But you can take the get date, and get date has to be used in a variable in a procedure. So for the valid end date as well as the valid start date for the next record. So let's begin our journey from Microsoft Fabric. So I'll jump out of the Microsoft Fabric, and in Microsoft Fabric, I would like to do a couple of things today. I would like to create one data warehouse where I'm going to maintain this, and I would also like to create a Data Flow Gen2. for this. Now I can pretty much bring this data using data pipeline also. It's your choice how you wanted to bring in. It is not going to make a difference. Data pipelines are typically faster in loading of data. They are meant for the purpose. So whenever there is a possibility that you can use data pipeline, you can use. I'm going to create a Data Flow Gen2, and in the Data Flow Gen2, I'm going to bring in data from Azure SQL database. In Azure SQL, I've created tables, sales and item I'm going to bring in, and for item we are going to create it SCD type 2. So what we are going to do, once we bring in the data for the first time, we will go and do a smaller modification, and with that modification we will try to bring it in and see that we get a new row for the modification. Fine. So let's begin our journey. So I click on new, show all, and then I'll create a Data Flow Gen2. I can pretty much also create a data pipeline, because for Azure SQL both are supported, but just to showcase you here, I'm creating a. So I'm going to click on get data, then I'm going to click on more, and there I'll search for Azure SQL. Azure SQL database. I'm going to give the details. So demo, because I have already used it once, it is already giving me the credential details. I have used the user ID and password there. I'll click on the next step. There are 4 tables here, but I'm interested in item and sales, no space. I'm going to say create. The tables are loaded here. And what I'm going to do is I'll add the destination. So under the home tab, I'm going to use the option in the middle, add destination, and I'm going to add it to the warehouse. Once I get that, I'll click on the next button below, and there I'm going to use 01 Fabric SCD showcase database, and I'm going to call this table as item staging. Now all the settings are correct, all the mapping is correct. I'll press on save settings below, and I'll click on that. So my destination for item is set. Now the next is sales, no space. I clicked on that. Again, I'm going to go to add destination, warehouse, next, 01 Fabric SCD showcase, and I'm not going to call it sales no space, I'm going to call it sales fact STG. Actually I've written a code, so I would like that to work. That's why I'm trying to give exact same name by using the copy paste. Now all set, we are all set to put this table into the warehouse, and from there we are going to take the next step of writing down a code which works for SCD and finally able to populate our sales fact. So I'm going to say publish. So publish of the data set, so publish of the data flow is happening right now. The data flow publish will happen in 2 phases. Phase 1 is basically when you have publish in progress, and phase 2 when you will have refresh in progress here. So once the data will publish, it will get refreshed. The refresh will load the data into the Microsoft Fabric. Now as you can see, the publish is already been done, and we have reached to a place where the refresh is in progress. Means the data is getting loaded. Now once this activity is finished, we will start creating our facts and dimensions. So while this is happening, let me go ahead and showcase you what are the facts and dimension table I want to create for today. Data Flow Gen2 has refreshed. Now time has come that we go to the warehouse and start creating our script. So on a new tab, I have already opened 01 Fabric workspace, and let me scroll down, SCD showcase warehouse. So I'm there in SCD showcase warehouse. Now in SCD showcase warehouse, we have 2 tables, item staging and sales fact staging. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down new SQL here, and in the new SQL I'm going to create an item dim with the surrogate key as unique identifier, and then I'm going to create a sales fact where item surrogate key will be populated using this unique identifier. So let me run this. The table has been created. Now let me run the sales fact script. So both are created. Now let me add another query where I'm going to explain you the code which I'm planning to run. Now please understand this code carefully, because this is what which is going to give you SCD, slowly changing dimension. So what happens in slowly changing dimension? So any ETL code, it will have two steps. The step one is basically it will update if the data already exists, and it will insert if the data is not present. Now this is a little bit tricky. Even if the data is present, sometimes we don't want to update. We only want to update if there is something new which is coming out, because we want to end date our valid end date. So what's new in this table? So in this table, if you look at the item dimension, this is my item dimension. Here I'm getting new, which is surrogate key. And I've also added a valid start date and valid end date. It means every time you got a record again and something has changed, it need to be updated with the current date, get date. Now in my case, because I don't have a data for the current date, I'm going to make this get date as hard coded as 2019-01-01. Also get date should be taken in a procedure in a variable, so that this get date and the get date which is going to come below should have the same value. Now what it's going to do is, if the item ID matches with item ID, that's when we update the records, but we are not going to update anything. We are only going to update the valid end date. When any of these things do not match, if the name doesn't match with name, or the brand ID doesn't match with brand ID, or the category ID doesn't match with category ID, or subcategory ID doesn't match with any. So any of the things which is participating in that row, if it is not matching, then we are going to end date. Means something has changed, let's end date that record. But who's going to create the record? So insert is going to create the record. So when should insert create a record? Insert should create a record whenever any of these things is not matching. So it's not only item ID to item ID John. If item ID is matching with item ID, name is matching with name, brand is matching with brand, category is matching with category, subcategory is matching with subcategory, brand is matching with brand, category matching with subcategory. So IDs and category and item, everything matching with each other, then we are doing a right join. And then we are checking with that right join, we are checking that doesn't exist in dimension. So when everything is matching, we are not bothered. What we are saying, doing a right join with the data, which is the new data which is coming in the staging, the new data which is coming in the staging, that is not matching. So that's where we are saying item ID is null. So the right hand side data is the new data which is not matching with your data. So in that case you insert it, and at that time we are giving a valid start date. Now there is a change here. When the item ID did not match, it means it's a new record. But when the item ID matched and other thing did not match, it means it's a new record because of SCD, because the dimension value has changed. So now to know whether this value exists in this table previously or not, that is where we have written this case statement. So what we are saying, select count star from item table. Again we are taking one more aliases, the existing item table, where item ID equals to the S item ID, the second table, the staging table's item ID. If it is giving me a count which is less than or equal to 0, then only you initialize it to 2008-01-01, and this is my beginning date of my data. Because, and this could be 1901-01 in your case, but I don't want to create such a long range. My data only is after 2018, that's why I'm creating it. You can create it 2000 or 2021 or whatever it is, so keep it within the range. Now the second thing what we are saying is else get date. Now again, this should be the get date which is coming from variable, but in my case I would say 2019-01-01, because I want to make sure that the previous record get ended on 2019, and that is why I will only change it once, so that I don't have to create the records with the same 2019 again and again. Now we need to test this out. And that is why you might have seen I have not created a procedure. So first time I should not get any updates. Let's run this update statement, and 0 records updated. Now before I insert, let me show you what it is returning. So I'm selecting it, and here look at the date which I was interested in, this to see this date 2018-01, because right now there is nothing exists in that table. So it should be 2018-01, not 2019. So in this insert statement of item, there is one thing which is missing, which is item surrogate key, which I am not inserting. So now let me add it. I was not adding it previously because I just wanted to show you the select statement. So now I'll add the new ID here. And once I add this new ID, now I'm going to run it so that it inserts a new surrogate key. And that is one which we are going to populate in our sales table. Now it has inserted 55 records. That's what we wanted. Now before I go ahead and insert this data into the sales table, because my sales table is not which is going to give me record after 2019 just like that. I don't want to write down an incremental of sales table here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and modify some of the data right in front of you and refresh my data flow, get the new data and run this statements again. So let me go to my SQL Server Management Studio where I've already opened this. And here on this item table, which is coming from my Azure SQL, I'm going to say right click, edit 200 rows. And here what I'm going to do is I'm going to change brand as brand 9 and brand as brand 9 for item 1. And for item 2, I'm going to make it as 6. 6 and brand is 6. Now I would also like to insert a new record. So for that, I'll scroll down and let me create a new row, 56, item 56, and let me copy whatever is above 9 to 15, brand 9, category 2 and subcat 15. Let me press enter and it got committed. So now I have one additional row and let me go ahead and now refresh my data flow, which is going to bring in the data. Now remember all these things, I should have a procedure. I should call my data flow, call that procedure into a pipeline. So both data flow gen 2 and procedure has to be called in a pipeline. But right now, just to showcase you how to create an SCD, I'm just doing it as a manual step. So let's go ahead and run the refresh again for our data flow. So 01 fabric, data flow 38, and we'll say refresh. Now remember, I have not put any incremental code for the sales, so it's going to load it again. And right now also I have not loaded any data in the sales fact, so I'm not too much bothered about that. But what I'm bothered about is that item staging data should change. It should update something and it should also insert the new rows. So how many rows it should update? It should update the 2 rows and it should insert 3 rows, basically the 2 rows for the updates and 1 row for the insert of the new data. So that is what we have to check out. So let's wait for it to complete. And once it is complete, then we are going to go ahead and validate that. One more thing, because Azure SQL supports data pipeline, you can do the same flow using data pipeline. So you can bring in both the tables using data pipelines and you can refresh your pipeline to load the data again. In the past, I have already shown you how to run incremental ETLs on the data pipeline. So the data flow gen 2 refresh has finished. Let's check on by clicking on refresh history. It is finished second time. Now we will go back here and now again step by step process. I'm going to check out how many rows it is going to update. So let me first run update, and in the update I'm expecting 2 rows to get updated. So 2 records are updated. Now before I insert, let me remove this new ID for a second and just query how many rows I'm getting. So as you can see, I'm getting 3 rows for insert, and look at the valid start date. This is 2019 and this is 2018, and that's what exactly I wanted. So it should be 2019 for the first and second, and it should be 2018 for the record 56. So I'm fine running this. Let me keep the new ID again and let me insert the new records. Now let's go ahead and query this table and see what we have. So we are going to query our item dim, a new SQL query tab, select star from item dim order by item underscore ID, comma, I want valid start date. I'm just going to copy it from here. So I copied both the names from the table, and let me run this now. Now, as you can see, item 1 and item 2 has 2 records, and let's scroll a little bit or right. One of the record is ending, another one is starting, one record ending and record starting. Now, because they are happening at the same moment, I don't have a timestamp to differentiate or even in a millisecond. That's where now my ETL in the sales table has to take care that whatever number of rows I have, they should not increase when I'm doing it. So let me do one thing. Let me first of all see how much data I have in my sales fact staging. So I'll say select top 100 rows. That will give me query, and now I'm going to say count star, which is going to give me the row count. So I have 30,000 rows, and my insert of this fact, sales fact. Let's look at what we have in the sales fact. The only additional thing, I should have an item surrogate key, which should not be present in the sales fact staging. Item surrogate key will not be present there. So that's the difference I have. So now let me go ahead and do one thing. Let me go back to my SQL queries. So now let me bring in the data for the sales fact insert. So I have got this query. Now this query, what it is going to do is basically is going to insert the data using the query, and the join is a little bit different. If you see here, the join basically here is from sales fact to dbo.itemdim. Item ID equals to item ID, but the sales date is between the start date greater than equal to start date and strictly less than this one. Okay. And before I go ahead and insert it, I actually wanted to count. So what I've done is I already written a count start statement, which should return me 30,000. So now because it is returning 30,000, I'm fine doing this. And let me say these things delete. So now I'm going to insert this data into the sales fact, where my join of item ID is basically a slowly changing dimension join, where the start date is also playing, and start date is applicable on the sales date. Now, if you have multiple dates, that's something which you need to take care. You need to populate multiple surrogate keys. Now let me run this. It is inserted 30,000 rows. Now how to validate it? For that, I already have this query here. What I'm going to do is where item underscore ID. So I'm going to say item ID equals to 1, order by sales date. Okay, and not 100. Let's get everything for item ID 1. So let me query this data. So now let's scroll on the right, and let's see what happens when the date changes. Now it is 2018 record. I'm looking for a record where 2018 and 19 are together. So this is the place where we have the 2018 and 19. And as you can see, in this row, I have a different item surrogate key, and this row I have different item surrogate key. And these are the two different item surrogate keys which are coming in from the dimension. And that is what we wanted to bring in. And this is helping us in now getting different values of the brand during different point in time with the same item ID. So we are able to maintain the historical data. So in this video, I have showcased you how can you create a slowly changing dimension when your original source is not of that type. Second, once you create that, how would you use that in your ETL? This is one of the questions which you have asked in YouTube comments. I appreciate all your comments and the new things which you want. So do let me know in the video comments what else you want me to cover in Microsoft Fabric series. Thanks for watching this video. Thank you.